very let down. I was very bitter about them, and I have actually got employment now, but I struggled, and they didn't want to help. I mean, the senior people in charge of me, once they'd had what they wanted, which was me as a witness, they sort of dropped me a bit. I was never really pleased about that. I felt very put upon.
There were 9 long weeks of prosecution evidence for the Old Bailey to mull over, but among the dozens of witnesses who took the stand, only one, Darren Charles John Nichols, offered a link between Worms and Steele and the murders. He was a brave choice for a star witness. Then, aged 32, he was already a known criminal sentenced to 3 years in prison for conspiracy to distribute counterfeit currency on November the 19th, 1992. He was also still to be sentenced on firearms and drug offences. During the 2 weeks in the witness box, he admitted he was a liar who had stitched up his friends. He met Steele in Hollesley Bay Prison in Suffolk in early 1993. The pair became friendly when they shared a cell. Nichols was released in May 1994, and they kept in contact. It was Nichols' claim that he was the unwitting getaway driver for the killings after he'd been arrested for them himself, which led to Worms and Steele being charged with triple murder. But there were many discrepancies in the interviews Nichols gave to the police. Perhaps the evidence that could have discredited Nichols the most was the allegation that he had been involved with an Essex police officer, dubbed corrupt by the prosecution. Nichols became involved with the policeman, known only as Detective Constable A in court, Wolfgang Bird, only weeks after the shootings, and according to the prosecution, they plotted to board a North Sea ferry and steal £150,000, planned to make amphetamines, stole drugs, arranged for Nichols to sell drugs, told senior police officers about 60 kilograms of dead cannabis, and let Nichols receive a £400 reward over the cannabis, and bought drinks together to celebrate. When John Marshall was found shot dead inside his Range Rover, 5 months after the Retterton killings, speculation was rife that the deaths were linked, especially as the Bellaricki car dealer had been a former partner of Pat Tate, and the pair were both keen on bodybuilding. The motive certainly wasn't robbery, as £5,000 cash was found on the dashboard of Marshall's vehicle. But Detective Superintendent Mike Gamble, who headed the murder inquiry, said, "There is nothing to suggest Mr. Marshall was anything other than an honest businessman. He was in a car business partnership with Pat Tate about 12 years ago, but because of Tate's behaviour, John Marshall got out of it. The worst Mr. Marshall got up to was smoking a bit of cannabis, stored a bit of cocaine, and he avoided paying his income tax." He added, "You don't need an O-level to sell cars. You just need streetwise connections and a bit of muscle. Mr. Marshall would deal in anything. He could go into a scrapyard in the morning, buy a written off Mercedes for say £8,000, sell that, buy something else, trade that up and end up with 5 locked up garages full of stuff in Kent at the end of the day." Money very rarely changed hands. For example, he would ask a builder who owed him £5,000 to put a roof on his house instead. The same with the swimming pool in his garden. He had energy and was quite a good businessman. The investigation into the death of 35-year-old Marshall, who lived in Blind Lane with his wife Tony and his 3 children, is no longer active, though the case remains open. Superintendent Gamble said, "We didn't have a murder scene to examine. We didn't have any witnesses or the weapon. We knew that he died fairly early on the day he disappeared, May the 15th, 1996, and it was within 20 miles of the Dartford crossing, but we don't know exactly where." The Range Rover was found in Sydenham, Kent, days later, and the body of Mr. Marshall, who was close friends with TV actor Bill Murray, who played Michael Steele in the Rise of the Foot Soldier movies, was covered in hay and a blanket. Sergeant Gamble said, "We had the hay tested by a Belfast scientist who was an expert on it, and he said it could have come from anywhere in the UK, and there was no earth attached to it for us to test." He admitted police think it was a professional hit, and that the killer was paid for it, and added, "I believe I know the motive and why he died, and probably who set it up, but I just can't prove it." Basildon has long been a magnet to Britain's drug traders, and the new town spawned one of its most sinister villains, Jason Veller. He was born and brought up in Vange, where he kidnapped, tortured and humiliated his enemies as he peddled drugs to schools. The 24-year-old was rounded up with his cronies as part of Operation Max, which took police 3 years to complete. He was jailed for 17 years in June 1995. At his trial, Vella of Holland Walk was branded the Tsar of South East Essex by the judge, and the full scale of his underworld dealings soon became apparent. The court heard one victim, Reggie Nunn, was kicked, punched and stabbed with a sword. He was forced to jump through a closed first floor window. Another man who displeased Vella, Mark Skeets, had his hair chopped and eyebrows shaved before the attackers photographed him. Then Skeets was jabbed with knives, burned with cigarettes and forced to lick LSD-coated paper and snort cocaine. A third victim had a broomstick inserted into his bottom before his picture was taken. Some of the witnesses had to be given new identities after Sadistic Vella was convicted of 4 conspiracy charges of supplying ecstasy, amphetamine sulfate and cannabis, causing grievous bodily harm with intent and ABH. He pleaded guilty to several other charges. Another case which brought the town to national prominence involved the smashing of an amphetamine sulfate ring in 1990. The brains behind it produced 40% of the black market speed in Britain. Detectives discovered the team could produce 1.2 million of drugs each week. It took 6 months of surveillance to arrest the man responsible, and he pleaded guilty to several other charges.